fairly radical sort of movement that's got going called Leavers of Britain, originally Leavers of London, and it's a group of independence campaigners who managed to get together to provide intense political pressure and have rather a lot of fun whilst they're doing it. I know because I've attended some of the functions for Leavers of London. And Ben Aston, who organises matters in Dorset, has very kindly come up to London to tell us about how he goes about it, because I think it's a very lively and worthwhile thing to look at. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Edward, and congratulations on your 50th anniversary. And thank you very much for inviting me here to take the place of Lucy. Lucy is the leader of Leavers of Britain, which was set up last year in November when she took Leavers of London and made it national. And she's developed a website where people can register as activists, and they can, if they're approved, they can upload events, and they can notify their membership lists. They can start to build a local membership list and start to kind of improve the Eurosceptic network in Britain. Oh, yes, of course.
A bit nearer to the mic, I think.
And I've used this platform. I've used this platform to build a mailing list from scratch since November of about 160 people. So it's been quite effective. It sounds like a small number when I say it, but it's actually quite a lot of people for us down in Dorset. And we've sent a coach of people to London. We sent 50 people to London on 29th of March. And we've held leafleting events, and we hold social events. So we've got a little kind of social dynamic going on down in Dorset. And we're using Lucy's platform for that. Now, Dorset is quite Eurosceptic, with the exception of possibly West Dorset, which you might have heard of, as it's Oliver Letwin's constituency. And I can see you might have heard of Oliver Letwin. But the existing Eurosceptic network in Dorset, when I started to try and kind of push the door and better understand whether reconnect with it, try and find out if one existed, that there really wasn't much of one. And I was a bit disappointed by that, but I suppose everyone thought that they'd won. But there were a few groups of UKIPers, very small groups. It was quite factional, and the groups had actually almost started to disband post-Farage because there was a lot of, that turbulent period that UKIP's gone through over the past couple of years has had quite an impact on the grassroots. There wasn't really a UKIP network. Leave Means Leave had a mailing list that we used to fill up the coach, and that was very useful, but even that was only a few hundred people. We're starting to rebuild the network, and I think it's easy to forget that in 2016 we really had a good win. We knocked it out of the park in England and Wales particularly. The average margin for victory in England, I think, was 9 points, which was a phenomenal result. Sometimes it's easy to forget that with the kind of media narrative that focuses on Remain. Just a note on the bus to London. I mean, this was our big thing that we've had in the past few months. We had a coach, and we started all the way in Weymouth, and then we went through Dorchester and through deepest, darkest Dorset, and we arrived in Westminster. That was a big thing for us. And we managed to get 53 people to fill in a coach. We tried to get enough people for a second coach. We got enough crowd funds for a second coach. They cost about £800. So we had the funds kind of pledged for a second coach, but we couldn't fill it. So this is the kind of, this is where we're at in terms of activism on the ground in the provinces. Dorset's population is 420,000 people. So we could get 53 people for the day that Brexit was betrayed from 420,000 people. So, I mean, as an ardent Brexiter, I'm slightly disappointed by that, but I suppose you've got to start somewhere. By contrast, Remain, for their event on the 23rd of March, they had 20 coaches from Dorset. So in terms of activism, Remain are streets ahead of Leave on the ground. So this is why this kind of activism, this kind of network that we're building using Leavers of Britain is vitally important. I don't think that could be emphasised enough. An entire region of Britain had no Eurosceptic presence on the ground at all until I started it in November. I mean, out of about almost 500,000 people. That shocked me, to be honest, because it's not as if it's news to us that Brexit's being betrayed. Even in November, it was clear that Brexit was being betrayed, and yet there was nothing going on. Remain was on the high street every weekend. So this is why we're doing this, and I mean, I think in terms of what this new network that we're having to build should look like, I think it's worth reevaluating Brexit and the Brexit debate, because I don't think the Brexit debate, as currently constructed, necessarily is going to win us out. Too often, in my experience, the stereotypes for Eurosceptics fit too closely. In my experience, this kind of uneven social authoritarianism, which is a bizarre contrast often with a kind of fiscal or economic libertarianism that we've heard mentioned earlier today. This juxtaposition of social authoritarianism and economic libertarianism, it doesn't travel more than 100 meters outside of this room. You keep hearing as a Eurosceptic kind of loose, overplayed arguments about religion and social identity, and there's a surprising enthusiasm for conspiracy theories. There's an endless indulgence in nationalism. And by the way, whenever someone brings up the topic of nationalism, the people on the other side of the debate don't hear what you think of as nationalism. They think ethno-nationalism. So you're instantly switching off the other side of the debate whenever you bring that up. So I think that a revisiting of the debate around Euroscepticism is very important, and I think that that's what I'm certainly trying to do down in Dorset, and Leavers of Britain hopefully will try and do as well. What we need to do is amplify the more sympathetic Eurosceptic voices to actually persuade people. This is where Euroscepticism has been atrociously bad at post-2016. Now, I've already dealt with the win that we had in 2016. We knocked it out of the park, but we are where we are. Now, the reason that this is important is because, one word, demographics. If you look at the chart for how sentiment is changing, it's starting to diverge. Now, you could say, well, we all know that Euroscepticism is correlated with age, right? So you might say, well, it's a function of age, and then everything's going to be okay because all the young Europhiles will slowly get older and they'll become more Eurosceptic and there won't be a problem. But of course, there's a big danger in that. First of all, it's quite complacent because there's no evidence, as far as I can tell, either way, that one is true. You're basically rolling a dice. So, and I can construct a narrative that the direction and the shift in sentiment is real. because the people who are more highly educated tend to vote Remain. Now, that doesn't make them more intelligent, it just means they've gone through more years of school. And young people have gone through more years of school. And so they're more likely to vote for Remain, regardless of what age they are. So I'm constructing a narrative here. I don't know if I'm right, but it seems plausible. You know, if I'm wrong on that one, there might be another one. So we need to take action in this area. I think as part of this reevaluation of the Eurosceptic debate, we need to examine some of the values of the other side and why they are winning with the cohorts of people that they are winning with, right? Why the average age of their supporters is several tens of years younger than it is in this room here today. Because, you know, these are the difficult questions that we need to ask ourselves. One element of it, I think, is the story that we tell, right? For at least half of the population, the story is just as important as the substance of the argument. When I went to the Donald Trump rally, anti-rally, if you will, in London last year, and spoke to people who were protesting Donald Trump, his visit to London, if you remember, none of the discussions were based around substantive issues. It was all about the style of Trumpism, right? And so what's the style of Euroscepticism? Well, for me, it's kind of angry, kind of nativist, kind of inward-looking. Now, I know that's not what, you know, lots of people can say, no, that's not what it is, but a lot of these elements are, do ring true in some way. And, you know, perhaps I'm being too negative here, but I think that we need to have a long, hard look at how we present ourselves to the outside world. Because a lot of the issues that in the Brexit debate are essentially people with political agendas hijacking Brexit. Because Brexit is not traditionally partisan. Brexit is not about left-right. It's not about libertarian or authoritarian, really. It's about the governance model of the United Kingdom. It's about how this country is governed. So often that gets lost in the debate about migration or, you know, the rights of workers, you know, things like that. I mean, I'll give you a story. I was just outside the Palace of Westminster, and there was a girl standing outside the entrance. And she was 21, she was called Katie, and she was a drama student. And every morning, between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., she stood there with a sign saying that we don't have to do this. And she was talking about, of course, Brexit, right? And I asked her, why are you standing here holding that sign? And she was very upset. And it became clear in the conversation that I had with her that she knew nothing about the European Union. As David said in his Q&A session, a lot of people don't know much about it, right? But all she'd done is she'd looked at the values espoused by the people on each side of the debate, the stories they presented, the narratives they constructed, and she said, I prefer that narrative. I prefer those values. Okay? This is an important issue, right? I think there are a lot of Katies. I think there are a lot of young people who know nothing about the European Union. I've spoken to hundreds of Remainers. I've spoken to even Remainers draped in EU flags opposite Old Palace Yard over there, right? Almost none of them understand the democratic legitimacy issues associated with the Commission, right? None of them understand the substantive issues of the debate. They're all focusing on the style of the debate, right? So this is where we need to shift as a Eurosceptic movement. And the only reason I'm having to talk about this is because ultimately we can see on the horizon a loss, right? If Brexit was being delivered, then I suppose I wouldn't have to be here and you know, I'd be programming a computer somewhere, right? So this is kind of a re-examination of the Eurosceptic debate, and the story that we tell ourselves. So if we accept that there's some truth in my analysis of the Eurosceptic movement, then what we need to do is clearly motivate re-engagement. If I put on a free bus to London, no strings attached, admittedly on a Friday, and I can only get 53 people out of 420,000 people, we need to have some motivation. You know what I mean? Even some people lying to me about why they're going to London, that would have cheered my day up a little bit more. But no, we had 53 people, and they were all solid Brexiters. We need to amplify the right voices and project the right story and values to a new, younger audience. I suppose, first of all, we need to understand what those values are. The kind of values that they espouse are things like collaboration, horrible words that we roll our eyes at, like synergy, and working together, and being part of something bigger than ourselves, right? We need to focus and address the challenges that these groups of people care about, not the challenges that we care about necessarily, right? So, for example, they care about climate change, and we all roll our eyes, right? Well, actually, the climate change debate, we can have that, but let's have it separate to Brexit, because we're not going to win. I mean, winning climate change and Brexit at the same time, we can't do one. So, instead of saying climate change, AGW, there's some questions about that, sorry. Well, no, let's not have that debate. Let's say, if we leave the European Union, we can still engage on the global stage. We can still cooperate transnationally and solve global warming, and this is how we'll do it, right? You don't have to start arguing with people about anthropogenic global warming and the question marks over it. And so we don't focus quite so much necessarily on traditional partisan politics. It's unnecessary. We focus on the core arguments and avoid as far as possible these kind of second-order policy considerations. So Leavers of Britain is currently undergoing a rapid expansion. We've got 25 branches across all countries of this nation. We've got about 6,000 people in the membership, and we're giving people the confidence. This isn't the speech I would give to somebody who wanted to join Leavers of Britain. I'm giving this to an audience of hardline Eurosceptics, but we're giving the people the confidence and the urgency to join us, and we're having low commitment kind of social events like coffee and cake meetups, right? What could be more harmless than a coffee and cake meetup? And they've been very successful in Dorset. You know, go down the pub, have a drink with us, just to talk about Brexit. Because so much of this debate as Leavers is about overcoming social stigma, because the Remainers basically dominate the narrative. You know, Leavers are all the racists, the bigots, blah, blah, blah. They control the story. And this comes back to my point earlier. We need to start controlling the narrative. We use social media to pressure MPs to do the right thing, and we slowly grow our network. And of course, as the network gets bigger, we become more important in things like deselections and stuff like that. So, how much time have I got? Not much?
Another 2 or 3 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. So just to finish off, what have I learned so far in the few months that I've been starting Leavers of Dorset? First of all, social media is very important, okay? We've only got 900 people following us on Twitter, on one platform. I can get several hundred quid in a few days via a crowdfund, via that route. That's cool, right? That's powerful. If I want to professionalize my street presence, I just put a crowdfund up. 2 weeks later, I've got 300 quid, 400 quid, and I can start to buy some tables and flags and print out some leaflets. That's great. And so we're doing that. We're keeping it light and friendly. The story is as important as the substance. So we're not retweeting Trump, which I've seen some Leave accounts do. We're not doing that. There's no need to do that. That's another debate. We're engaging with the media. Engaging with the mainstream media is very important. So, for example, I've done a number of interviews. I've been on Norwegian television, but we also had, you have to be careful. We had a BBC journalist come and do a radio interview in Dorchester, which is in Dorset, out in the sticks somewhere. And you have to be careful. This was the first meeting we had. I didn't know these people. I didn't know who they were. Ostensibly, the interview was going to be with me. It ended up being a round-table interview with everyone who had attended. Okay? So it's impossible for me to control. Of course, the BBC journalist knows what he's doing. Thankfully, everybody there was pretty sound, but it could have gone a different way. And then, of course, at the end, the journalist starts to move the conversation on to Tommy Robinson. So you need to be careful, and you need to be firm. But you need to engage with them, because as it turns out, I had a nice radio interview. It went on BBC Radio Solent, and lots of people heard about it. So it can be a force for good. So in summary, everything's not okay in British politics at the moment. We all know that. It's been covered already by the other speakers. Quite apart from the problems of Euroscepticism that I've touched on earlier, you know, we live in a democracy where the second largest democratic vote in UK's history is not being delivered upon. So that's a rather big problem. But there is a shift underway. You know, the Tory party has lost, I think it's 9 points in 1 month. So there's a shift underway, and we're riding that crest. But you need to be there to ride on the crest. So the time is now, as that political shift is underway, to organise and to take action. Thank you.
So, thank you very much indeed, Ben. That's given us a great deal, I think, to think about.